This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
Dave on the board. This is our weekly look at the environment and rails, trails, and the environment again, and conservation, and whatever else Dave feels like talking about. Today is the 23rd of April, 2017.
So we have Bill Saylor as guest, and we're going to talk about environmental things, especially salvage. He's been doing things with salvage and being rather innovative about it. And we need to remind people you need to do things with salvage that are help the process along. You need to know what you can salvage and functionally reuse. You need to know what the value of cans, for instance, is. The price of cans has gone from 57 down to 37. It's gone up just a little bit, but so you have to balance that between the cost of taking a vehicle to a recycling center, and the advantage is not great, so a lot of our cans go to the landfill at the moment. But I wanted to say something about a few of the things that have been happening during the week. We had two people retire from the city council. Paul Faraci, many of you know, had a father with a restaurant, and a mother, Flora, with Jane Addams bookstore, and the family has been quite involved in public service. And we had Mike Ledoux, who's been on the council for 32 years.
Michael Ledoux.
Yes, and so that's a fair chunk of your life to spend in public service, and he also happens to know a lot about those 32 years, whereas most other people on the council are younger, and so he has the opportunity or the advantage of being able to remind people of what happened with the Big Dig when you first were looking at the boneyard. He's been there for a lot of the decisions about the Burnham Hospital and other sites over those 32 years. And he also has a penchant for speaking eloquently when he needs to, and perhaps even adding a poem or two. So that's we wish both those well. I think Paul is going to be working with the township, and obviously Mike Ledoux will be working with the library, where he has been on the board for quite some time.
I got acquainted with Michael Ledoux when I interned at the city in the mid-'90s, and I was carless for a certain number of years.
Uh-huh.
So I'd ride my orange Raleigh 10-speed,
Uh-huh.
and he also has a Raleigh, so we
Yeah.
bonded pretty quick over that. So we never failed to recognize the bike, at least. And in fact, when he came around with his petition to run this time around, he stopped by where I live, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm the guy with the orange Raleigh, and it's hanging up in the garage." And so I opened the garage. He's like, "Oh yeah, it's got all the original components." And I also shortly after we first met, had the pleasure of ending up sitting next to him on an Amtrak ride to Chicago. Just kind of randomly. And so over 3 hours we got
He has a lot of
talk
history.
about whatever.
He grew up near to Beardstown, in western Illinois, and he's rather fond of Havana. So he had a little story about Westville or some town with Westville, but it had a very small town, and but it had something to do with Lincolnalia. And he had been to Havana recently and gave a little retiring talk about that. And Mayor Swihart was there,
Oh, maybe I'll have some time to do more history
Yes,
contribution to the community. And he was also part of the group that rescued the brick street, specifically on Elm Boulevard. The one place, almost the one place in Champaign where there's a grassy boulevard in the middle of a one lane on either side, brick street. Other communities like Bloomington, Peoria seem to have more of those configurations, but in Champaign, that's the showcase.
There was
one.
a big argument about whether the mall in the middle was stopping fire trucks from getting in with big, wide trucks. The roads around each side of the mall are fairly narrow. So I think there was some agreement that was come to there, I think.
Yeah, it was remains sort of a oral agreement among the neighbors that they won't park there overnight and obstruct the lanes. And then the city, for their part, instead of taking out half the grassy median and putting in diagonal parking, which was the original plan at the time that everybody objected to who lived there, including the head of the Department of Landscape Architecture at the university. So, so you're going to have opposition to a plan like that. So the solution there was just to put in a soft sort of rolling curb in the center, and cars can go around that way, and the fire trucks. The thing is, Public Works and engineers and fire departments and that, they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger equipment.
Yes.
And like a lot of other things that consumers buy, the original infrastructure was not necessarily designed with that in mind.
Yes, and
It's like
changes have to
mowers.
be
It's
made.
like a lot like mowers in that regard.
So yes, I can remember elevators in Australia were using tank carriers from World War II, and the elevators were the loading ramps were made for narrower trucks, and so they had to saw off one side of the elevator barricade to allow those big trucks to come through. And that happens here too. Well, it was Marathon, and I have to say that the city has gets a lot of kudos for running a marathon. The police were out there allowing people to cheer people on and allowing vehicles to blow through when there was not a gap in the runners, and just a very friendly situation. I think we need that a lot, and I don't know how many people were involved, but I suspect it was over 1,000. And it went past Westside Park, it crossed Market Street right at the end of our street that Weft is on, and it disrupted the traffic a little bit for a short time. There was a 5K on Friday night. So I want to applaud the volunteers that were out there with cowbells ringing things on and letting people know what they could do and couldn't do, and making sure that people ran a straight track without getting off the beaten path, which has a lot to do with the timing of professional people who are really running the race for time. Others were quite genuine, but not quite as fast. I don't know what the results were, but this is now a national level marathon, and it attracts a lot of people. I went to Ebert first, and that was inspirational. It had a theme which was the Alliance for Inclusion and Respect has been around for quite some time with various different names, but they were emphasizing empathy, kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. And the films that were shown were, several of them were ones that Roger Ebert, who's now passed, had selected in his day, but they had this sort of theme, and I had a hard time taking the time to go, but I felt rather pleased to have gone and to work with people who have tried to do things and done them well, not necessarily without mistakes, but it encourages us who have the challenge of doing nonprofit activities to keep going and encourage the rest of the community to do so too. So I find it a place where you meet people, you shake hands with a next door neighbor, you talk to people, you hear people whistle, you catcall or to stand in an ovation. Just another international level event. Roger and others would bring in people like Cox from Australia or other places. So the West Coast, East Coast was represented well, and directors and various camera people and people who were explaining their lives and letting people know that you can do things. Not easy, but you can do things if you try. Some of those films were oriented to the black community and how they fit into the general community. And you have people who are sports people who are sometimes very good sports people, but they don't have a lot of access to psychologists, psychiatrists, and others, and it's often sort of a non-done thing to be asking for help, and so you get these tough sports people who don't talk to each other or to talk to other people, toughing it out when they could be doing other things that would involve liberating their mind to other people and sharing in a manner that would allow them to help. And some of these things come with programs that have humor and they have a sting in the tail, even if you think you mightn't be looking at a film that has some message. Roger Ebert has often stressed the fact that we don't know each other totally, and films allow us to briefly enter the lives of other people and go to other places that we would never see, and that I find is excellent. Outside of that, there are other people who are also volunteering. They're taking tickets or checking people out, or they're controlling traffic. And one engineer, Stuart, that I was talking to quite a bit, takes vacation time to do this, and I think that is good. And we should congratulate the Park District for taking over responsibility for the Virginia Theatre, which is rather a wonderful theatre, and gets accolades from people like Norman Lear, who was there last night at the age of 93, to tell his story and add interesting tidbits that keep the audience interested and afloat. And always the participants are respectful of the theatre as a theatre and respectful of the fact that there's 1,500 people there, and that's not what you get when you get to go to a row of small theatres that will carry perhaps 50 or 100 people at a time, and you can hear the next door film going at the same time. So I wanted to say something about those two things, but let's
Well,
get on.
I want to add to that a lot of the discussions that aren't the films themselves are streamed and remain on YouTube.
Oh, that's
can
very
revisit it.
nice.
Ebertfest.com is their festival homepage.
Uh-huh. Yes.
No hyphen.
I was thinking about that because I had to depart to do other things for a while. And
Yeah, I had to
missed-
make a decision Saturday morning.
Yes.
Whether will I be able to even get in if I go to the hotel for this one? And in the end,
Yes.
I didn't.
That-
I don't know if that was one that was streamed or not, but there are many of those discussions, the stage interviews and whatnot, that you can see
Things
for
have-
yourself.
Things have improved a little bit with, they have lectures to go with this. And they were usually held in the Union, which is murder if you're trying to get a population
years,
of
yeah.
people from the Union to Virginia. But now we have a Hyatt hotel, and in the basement there, they have a room that's big enough, and it's close enough that the population, I think, was larger than you get in the Union. So they
Very
have
good.
9 people panels and discuss various aspects of film. So those two things were important. If we don't have time after salvage, if we do have time, I will ask you something about the Christian Science Monitor, Christian Science Church that will become a ball diamond.
I don't know anything about it.
It's in the
But I
school
do know-
district, but you have a daughter that's high school age. And I think that this
Well-
church would be a wonderful alternate school system. Not everyone learns by sitting in a classroom. And this has an auditorium, it has reading rooms. I hate to see that building destroyed for a park. Almost the same sort of thing with the YMCA. The retired YMCA next door will be a football field.
Well, the school board, Champaign School Board, we're talking about,
Yeah.
claims that the plans are in development, not all finalized. So the venue for
Yes,
that kind of input would.
I
be the school board.
apologize for going to the school board meeting and saying that, but
Well, they're attuned now more than ever. I think that the community has some varied opinions on the future development, because that's how we got to this point.
well, there's some historic buildings. There's one building that was
Yeah.
moved in at one stage was a historic Burnham building, and there's a historic Travis Mattis Harris building also, and so this is part of our history. Could those things be incorporated into the fretwork of the infill school? I almost think so. The historic buildings are more difficult than the church, which is on one floor. But anyway, let's get to salvage because
Well,
Bill.
actually, as a bridge, and is on the chart here. First of all, you're listening to WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM. This is the Prairie Monk program. I'm Bill Saylor, by the way. I used to be here more often.
He
before there
was my
pictures of it.
engineer for how
That's
many
right.
years?
Before we had to do a video production every
So,
week.
so
He
how
was
many
Dave.
years were you?
He was Dave
engineer?
before I was.
17.
17 years.
But Dave
It's
Watani here at the board has been here 5 or 6 already since then.
yes.
Going on 6, I think. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. This is the week in Champaign, Urbana, where everything is planned at once.
Yes.
So
it happens every year.
It's not always the Marathon Ebertfest at once, but apparently they had to make room for a big show next weekend that's going to draw a lot of people at Assembly Hall. Assembly Hall.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
That's
It's not
called
named
the
after an
Assembly
insurance
Hall
I know it
anymore.
isn't.
It's
And
That's
the
okay.
insurance
Some
company.
people still refer to like what is
State
it, the
Farm.
Red Lion or Chances Are or whatever.
And it's just the auditorium. It's
wagon
not the
wheel.
Follinger auditorium. It's just the auditorium.
Yeah, I
people.
realize I don't get that, but I'm still going to call my references what they were. I got them. So this has been Earth Day and Earth Week.
yes.
Of course, every day is Earth Day. When
I would
for the
remind
Prairie
people
Monk.
that there's the boneyard cleanup on the 29th.
The 29th. There's a week full of stuff. There's already been several days worth of things. One of which is kind of a long-running Sonified Sustainability Festival.
Yes,
Which
there's
is,
music.
Aggregation of musicians, many of whom have built their own instruments, some of which are more or less traditional instruments, and some are a little beyond that. So yesterday, Jason Finkelman was in the lobby of Krannert Center for the Performing Arts with a guitarist. He's played with long before he moved here, Jeff Kirsch. Bradford Reed had sort of a string on two bridges, almost like a lap steel, but he didn't exactly play it that way. And then Terry Dame, who had, it's hard to explain, but I have a picture and I'll put it up, some horn pieces and air pumps and things that were all fitted with sensors and controllers that triggered samples and beats and things like that. So she would set up just by waving her hands or pumping the pumps. And they were tied to these samples that NASA has posted of sounds from space. Which she said, yeah, they put this up a couple of years ago. And she said, fun times. And she demonstrated how well that could work.
You could put in whales, you could put in sheep.
And then she could change the pitch and things like that. So it had a little bit of visual, as people say now, steampunk aesthetic, but the music was like, I started to wonder, does she DJ in clubs with this setup? Because, well, she will be at Urbana Free Library, I believe, at 4 p.m. this Monday, so tomorrow, as we're broadcasting on Sunday. So tomorrow, the 24th, with a bit more of a demonstration. Jeff Kirsch, and I think Bradford Reed with him, will be playing along with a film the following day at Spurlock Museum called The Epic of Everest. And so one of Jeff Kirsch's projects has been to do soundtracks of silent films. I didn't research this. I got the impression this is vintage film of Everest expeditions. That is at 7 p.m. Spurlock Museum. Nice auditorium, fairly new. This is what we would call behind Granite Center for the Performing Arts, off of Lincoln Avenue at I want to say Gregory, Nevada. Thank you.
So is it just on the west side of Lincoln Avenue?
On the 25th, April 25th, 7 p.m., will be a screening also at Spurlock Museum of Kayanesqatsi. Wow. You know it. Dave responds.
Oh, I love that movie. John Cage?
No.
No? Who did the music?
Philip Glass.
That's the other one, right.
Philip Glass
the
did
other
music.
John Cage.
This movie is not just an art film. It is art. Kayanesqatsi is either a Hopi or Navajo word attributed to, meaning life out of balance. And it is a photography of landscapes as technology and people have encroached on them. It was filmed around 1980. Well, it was filmed over many years, actually. It came out in, I want to say, maybe 82. So I think Jason said it's the 35th anniversary of the film coming out. So Kayanesqatsi has got Philip Glass music, which you may feel one way or another about, but it's perfect for this film. At one point, I had the pleasure of seeing this film shown on a screen with Philip Glass Ensemble playing with it live. That is not the case this time. It's just a showing. It is an amazing film. And anybody interested in the environment and art and design and landscape and people's impacts on themselves and what they do, I would recommend they see it. It's actually one of 3 films that the filmmaker eventually made of this nature.
2 days. What?
Yeah, 2 different days. So Kayanesqatsi airs or is shown on the screen at Spurlock Museum, 7 p.m., April 25th. Okay, the Everest film with Jeff Kirsch, April 23rd. Wait, that's today. That's tonight.
And
That's tonight.
some of these people are taking risks with life. They're not the average straightforward persons. They're doing things like climbing Everest and then getting caught in avalanches and what have you, or crevasses, and losing their lives perhaps. But there is a challenge there that makes it interesting for us to watch, because we may not be able to do that financially or otherwise.
So Kayanesqatsi is Tuesday, then it works out. The math works out, right? Later on during the week, Eric Leonardson will host walks through Meadowbrook Park and Busey Woods, and they're listening walks, active listening walks. He's got 3 afternoon and evening times on the 27th and 28th. 27th will be at Meadowbrook, 28th at Busey Woods. They do ask if you want to go to kind of reserve a spot. For more information about any of this, cranertcenter.com. and then you can poke around in a few clicks and
Yes.
find out how to reserve or verify what I said about where things are, when they are, and what day is what day. So they had at the Cranert Center for Performing Arts yesterday when the trio and then Jason played together in the afternoon in the lobby. It was also basically a part of the festival where there were maybe 8 or 10 tables set up with different student organizations presenting what they do. And so I got introduced to the Illini Gadget Garage, which has a space down in the South Research Park, I think towards the top of the hill probably. They share a garage that Natural History Survey
So this is
has
engineers?
space. Well, I guess it's whoever wants to learn how to. The aim is if you got something that's slightly broken, they will help you and/or provide the tools to get in there and poke around with it to rescue it.
Yes, we need
So-
that desperately. As it Habitat for Humanity used to have George Kiefer. He was a retired professor, but he would repair tables. And it's amazing. Sometimes what goes into the trash can only needs a screw or some sort of adaptation. And he's retired from that now. And so this week I took a chair there. It needed a little bit of repair, and it was denied because it needed repair. So I brought it back, and I harvested the steel off of it,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest went to Clinton to the landfill. But yes, we need people who can do gimmicky things with.
Well, they're also collecting batteries for recycling. I mean, standard household size batteries. And I told them a few months ago I had an iron that was kind of crapping out because it was developing an open in the cord, where the cord bends. Even though there's a reinforcing piece, there's stress relief, whatever they call it, where the cord goes into the device, there's still a point where the cord bends
Yes.
more often than other places, and that's the part that invariably wears out, including in headphones and that. Well, in the iron, how complicated is an iron?
Yes.
It's not. So if you can get in there, I can cut
Bill
off the
is
bad
talking
part.
about an iron that irons clothes.
That's right.
Not-
Iron
not
my clothes.
A generic iron. It was used a lot.
It's a Black & Decker iron.
And-
So how hard can it, there's only one screw holding the device closed. But it's a screw that they design to not let the consumer in there.
Yes.
So instead of getting a Phillips, undoing the screw and doing all that other simple work, the screw it wasn't a Phillips with like a cross slot. It had like a peace sign. It was a 3-pronged thing.
You had to have a special tool.
Good luck finding that.
Yes.
I eventually found one, and not one in a box of 20, but one single such bit at Menards. But it took me like 4 hardware stores to get there.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm talking to the student representatives of the Illini Gadget Garage, and there on the table they have a little kit of you name the bit. so that's
you
the kind
can-
of resource they're trying to provide.
You can spend a fortune doing this sort of
exactly.
thing.
Exactly.
So you have to work out what it's going to cost to take cans to the junkyard when it's going to give you 37 cents a pound. How much is going to cost in gas? How much is going to cost in time? You can spend a lot of time with computer things. I this week was talking to Ameren, and Ameren has a programming problem in that if you have a private phone and a business phone in the same business, the computer cannot recognize the difference. So if you pay one bill, the other bill will keep responding as if it's commercial.
You mean AT&T or
No,
Ameren
Ameren.
Power? Okay.
And so it needs some of the attention that we get from improved tectonics, technology. We need to make sure that there are algorithms that make everything work, and sometimes they don't. And you can spend a small fortune on a bill that's $5.
So do you have 2 meters too? Two accounts or
Two accounts.
two physical meters also.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but they're in the same building, so the computer recognizes that.
So the last student organization I want to mention, since it's fresh in my head, is one that makes paper, and they're making paper out of leftovers from the student sustainability farm. They're experimenting with, quote, prairie grasses, which I asked them to qualify. They're like, we need to ask our advisor that one.
There's a cordgrass that the Indians used to use. It's very strong. If you rub your finger along it, you're likely to get your finger cut. But it's very strong, and you can weave it and make baskets from it. And yes.
So these students were our students, and I think it was set up by one of the art and design teachers. But I can imagine material science types being interested in this. I had a buddy I went to school with who ended up getting a doctorate down here in metallurgy, but he spent a lot of his free time carving wood, and eventually made his own furniture, and he was always doing something with some material. So I'll bet this will have a
So what did he end up in? Dentistry?
Metallurgy.
Metallurgy.
I should. It could be. Yeah.
Metallurgy, we have people who are working in ceramic engineering who can take fly ash and take the silicates and the aluminum out and put them into plastic so that they can create a railroad tie or a strong piece of material that's much stronger than a wooden tie or a steel tie, and has the ability to flex as a 100-ton car goes across it. So yes, we have professors of these games. So that when you start off at age 4, to do things that are interesting there, and you teach students to recognize things as they walk around, both girls and boys, doing this, then gradually they get to be teenagers and adults, and they continue this sort of interest.
In fact, all the students I talked with at these two tables were women. So the paper production outfit is Fiber by Fresh Press, and you can find out more at fiberbyfreshpress.com. So they were recycling students' old artwork. You left behind artwork, different paper. Like I said, different stock from.
So they make a paper mache, and then put it on a frame, and then press plants into it. And
not sure what all their
images
techniques are traditionally.
And then they can let that dry, and you have a paper image which can have a third dimension, rather than if you were silk screening, for instance.
And then you get into binding techniques and
yes,
things like that, if you're producing like notepads or whatnot.
And you have to be careful that sometimes this gets to be regarded as craft, and there's a separation between craft and art. And so you have craft shows as well as art shows. And it's very hard to merge the two. And we have a lot of our things in society and in the environment that are not exactly pure. How do you meld the two? How do you have a range of different people who have different interpretations and different physical abilities and different materials to work with? So I think the world is becoming more attuned to working with differences, and so some things will become regular, but you also have to be, as a scientist, you have to be respectful of the fact that you may find out something, but next week that will change. So you can't be too tied to your particular discipline. You have to know that your finding will be augmented by another finding in the future. And there are some things we just don't know about. For instance, this week I was listening to something that had to do with clairvoyance. Can you stand a man on a cliff and have him identify the submarines that are out there? And it would appear that some people can do this. Why they can do it, nobody knows. But there's a lot of research about it. It's very strange that sometimes somebody will be asked to find a body or a theft
Or water.
or water, and they will know where it is. And you have to know that there's an eel that finds its way to the center of an ocean and then finds its way back to a creek where it was presented. So it has to do with electromagnetics, perhaps. How do birds fly? So it's lots and lots. How does a monarch butterfly fly thousands of miles and know where to land? How does it battle with cold and other creatures that would like to eat them? So there's protective mechanisms that we constantly find. There's a biochemical in there that may be good for your brain or things that we don't know about. So it's very important that we save some of this sort of thing. And we were talking about a person who was dealing with monkeys, Jane Goodall. And Bill was just talking about taking photographs of the extent of utilization of things. She's got forests that are coming back. If you take an aerial now, she's working with young people and taking a photograph of above. She's convinced that the locals, that they make more money from ecotourism than they will ever make from putting a coffee plant in there and harvesting it and not having the mechanism to sell it or distribute it. So yes, we have to do the same thing here. We have to save our railroad beds for a prairie that is almost extinct. End of my conversation.
You're tuned to WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM. This is the Prairie Monk program. That's Dave Monk. And every Sunday he talks about all things environmental and then some. I'm Bill Saylor. I used to say that at these pauses. Dave Watsani's here this week, of course, too.
Well, I just went out over the little pocket prairie and took photographs. There was someone in there and just enjoying it. And had a radio. I was listening to the Gospels. And so the golden Alexander is flowering, and the ginger, wild ginger is flowering, and the coppice plants and the docks are starting to grow, and we took off a lot of the litter that stops the heat and light from getting into the plant early, and the whole prairie is in action. And so we need to be able to show people what certain plants look like when they're in their juvenile stages. How can we preserve them? How can a computer program help people understand it? How do we use our technology the same way as Ebert Frisch was using their technology to introduce people to things they didn't know too much about, like the psychology of sportsmanship and how it might mean that you have to watch concussion or you have to watch how people interact with each other. But we're in the middle of Earth Week, and it's Volunteer Week. So join up with something like the Boneyard Cleanup and go to some of these things and take your small children and introduce them to things that are exciting only if you help them to understand that they're exciting. Read a poem or...
Take them on a walk outside.
Yes, away from that computer.
Maybe with Eric Leonardson here.
Yes.
They might not find that most
so
exciting.
What do you think they're going to hear in Busey Woods? Is it going to be owls?
Those are probably good places to be. I'm going to say briefly, I've been to one or two meetings about the University of Illinois is revising its campus plan. It's like a 10-year update kind of thing. They have a consulting firm to do it. I'd like to come back on to talk about that in more detail before long. But they've solicited and are still soliciting input from whoever wants to comment about different places on campus, how they feel about them. One of my issues that I don't know if it comes up with many other people is the audio environment. For the longest time on the quad, the main quad, there was this kind of whirly noise. And I don't know if it was from air conditioning on, let's say Davenport Hall. the ag building.
Yes.
It's not there now because I went yesterday. I went back. It was a nice day. I was in the neighborhood, right? So I took a long walk, took a lot of pictures and stuff, and then listen, So the quad is, known to be this public relaxing space and kind of semi-recreational space. But there's in certain corners there's this really annoying noise. It's always there.
You mentioned air conditioners. The air conditioners create a temperature probably 2 degrees higher. So we have to think about climate and environment. And human brains work at a certain temperature, like 20 degrees centigrade. How do we increase that acuity in people's minds and realize that the extra energy being expended is maybe putting us into a different configuration in the world's climate?
I also believe there's a certain psychological energy expended to filter out this ambient noise floor that is increasing. I guess people who live in urban environments, are more adept at this. And so that's why it might be interesting to go on the walks in the parks to see, okay, we're going to listen to park noises, but what other ambient noise is going on there? Is there road noise? Is there highway noise? Like out in Busey Woods, can you hear I-74?
Yes,
It depends on the weather, depends on the humidity, probably depends on the wind direction. And when we're active in the moment, I think our bodies, for most of us, do filter out some things. Like right now, there's this ventilation noise. That's pretty low key. It's no big deal. Right in the room we're in now. Some people have a harder time with that. So I was at briefly at the Master of Fine Arts exhibit.
Yes.
Where the graduate students in fine arts at the U of I have their final work up for 3 weeks or something like that. And there was one piece there that was sort of in 2 layers. And the design in it was embedded on plastic, sort of like upholstery plastic. And the background piece was, it had a woven rug feel, and there was like a figure of a woman in there. And so there was some solid piece embedded in the clear plastic. And in front of it was an entirely clear plastic with an outline drawn on it of some design, which turned out to be a gun, like a exploded diagram of a gun, as it were. So there was contrast there. But when you're in there, so I tried to take a picture of it. And I realized as soon as I'm looking through the image of my phone that this does not convey what this is. When you're standing there, your eyes, your perspective are doing the filtering that your body has learned to do in your physical environment for however old you are, right?
Yes.
It's like, well, I guess I can't necessarily bring this evidence into the video if I talk about this on the radio, but it's one of those things. So I'm sorry, I don't know how we got to that.
No, that's what we need.
Audio portion of your environment.
So Bill has been going to different things that make us think about our future, and there is real climate change, and as an Australian, I'm dealing with a barrier reef that is suffering from increased heat in the oceans, and so it allows a starfish to invade. It means that a lot of the very choice fish and wildlife, the coral can be sort of bleached, and it can still survive, but only just. And it doesn't have the capacity to move south to be in a cooler climate. What do the coal-carrying ships that go to China from Australia do when they go through? What does their propeller do to a shark or a whale or a worm or a bivalve mussel? What are we doing? And sometimes it's what do we make in terms of money rather than what we do in terms of sense. we have to be out there, and it's nice to go to some of these events that you're talking about, and be given the opportunity to think about things that you've not thought about before. It might be a medical situation, or sometimes it's just your own physique. People don't always know their own bodies. They are so intent on working in their body changes to meet their working situation, and they go home and they have 3 jobs, and how do you get the time to think? And how do you get to merge something like a white community and a black community? And sense the difficulties that you have as you come through from a slave society to a society that's not always free to do what it wants to do. If I have a black person to work on the little prairie, then I have to know that that person will be viewed differently from by the police department or by other individuals. Will they be watched, or will they be free? How do they be free? And just those things are tremendously important. And when I go back to the Christian Science building, I'm thinking of how people learn those things. And I've had a lot to do with education too, in a manner, and that included people who didn't quite fit into the normal educational spectrum. Sometimes they're professorial children that are totally bored with what they're doing at the high school, and they're there. There are musicians, and there are artists, and they need space and the opportunity to be free. And that's why I think to even write a letter to the newspaper to say something about the Christian Science building, because it's a fairly modern building. It's on 1 floor, so it can be accessed by wheelchairs, and it has nooks and crannies where people can have a small studio space. I go to the Boneyard Festival, and the Lincoln building that was built mainly for attorneys has now 16 permanent renters in the area that are artists. And if you go to Michelle Mitchell's art corner, there
Melissa
are
Mitchell?
Melissa. You see dolls and creatures that Melissa has in retirement done things. And we have another group of people, we're talking about young people a lot, but we have people who retire, and for the whole of their life they might have been thinking about spirituality, and where does spirituality fit into, perhaps if you go to India, are you a Christian, are you a Jain, are you a Muslim, or are you, where do all these people fit together? If you go to Afghanistan, do you go to Turkey and get Kurds? And how do you know about these creatures? If you don't have the money to go to those places, then sometimes it's films and slides and acting that tells you about these things. Street actors can sometimes come forth with ideas that you don't know about. And you have a daughter that is in this sort of turmoil at the moment, where students are learning so much so fast that they can hardly slow down.
Well, yes, but she's also in the camp of finding herself bored in a lot of classes, to the point of, are you going to have to retake that next year? Because you're not turning your homework in? She'd probably like a studio space in the Christian Science building. That'd probably be great. Yeah.
So then you have to understand that there's a huge population. And,
So we do have a fairly diverse town in some ways.
Yes, but
and
that
the Champaign-Urbana.
so the huge population is inviting in people from other countries where they don't fit. But how do we suggest to people that they have that there should be less humans in order to allow the caterpillars and the frogs and the monkeys and the elephants and the prairies to have room to move and to preserve?
So I guarantee we're not going to talk much about salvage this hour, but you are tuned to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM and the Prairie Monk program. I'd be happy to do another show on salvage because I needed to reassemble my notes about all the places in this town.
One of the things that I remember Bill doing recently was mattresses. Have had a hard time because mattresses may have.
But this is going to be a 20-minute story. Because I must have taken 50 pictures.
May have bed bugs in them.
Mm-hmm.
So the recycling people don't like to take them. So where do they land it? We have a small prairie with 9 acres, and there's a road alongside it, and it's not very obvious, but subcontractors like to dump mattresses. And when they get wet, they're very heavy, and they have fabric. And what Bill did with some mattresses he had that needed to be recycled, he took the fabric off, and he took the wood off the stages underneath them. And
called Dave and said, "Do you have room in your truck for this metal?
Yes,
you can take it."
and the metal can be recycled because
that's the short version of the story. But I would like to retell the long version of the story because then people can learn from it later.
Yeah.
A sofa as well, took part of sleeper
Oh,
sofa.
some of the sofas we get dumped are extremely heavy. You almost need a front end loader to lift them after they've gotten wet. There's a lot of you need a sledgehammer to break them.
I'll say that I don't understand when people are even just throwing things out or hoping somebody will get it from their front curb. If it's going to rain tonight,
Don't do that.
Yes.
I'm shrugging my shoulders for the radio listeners. It's like, come on.
My pet peeve
Don't do it.
is people who put stuff into the dumpster, somebody else's dumpster often, and it's a chair or a table or.
It's got volume.
Yes,
most of which is not the
tremendous
material.
volume, and it fills up the whole thing. So then the cardboard that goes in on top of it, well, it probably should go into the next door neighbor's bin because there's a bin for cardboard, but it's full because somebody kindly breaks down their beer cartons and fills them in a box and then puts the box in the dumpster. So it takes up all the volume of half or 2/3 of the dumpster. So how do we teach people to do that? I think to some extent we need a city that has commercial recycling so that it's a teaching experience. We used to have commercial recycling at Kmart over behind the city buildings, and it was marvelous because people came there, they talked to each other, they got excited about finding salvage material that they would like to take out, but it got to be that different districts would put garbage in there or use it, and the tax base was something like 72,000 for keeping those dumpsters together. So they were axed, but we used to have a recycling center, and something the same was happening there. We need these places where people do get together and talk to each other.
So I came looking for you yesterday to decide what we're going to talk about today. And some people were together on the next block because it was record store day on top of everything else. So realized you weren't in, figured you were at the movies. And then I heard this bass and drums start up
On the other side, yes.
over in the train station. There's now a secondhand shop.
Yes.
And record store, new and used.
Dead alive.
And so for record store day, independent record store day, they have XL on Main Street. They have bands in. So the band was Moats, which you and I have had the pleasure of filming here in the studio one day. And I stayed for a couple of their songs. But yeah, there's a variety of people hanging out on the sunny lawn and the streetscape.
The town was full of people.
Yeah.
One thing I have This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champagne 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board, and we should
Bill
introduce.
Saylor.
I was going to say he's had
I'm
to
done.
introduce himself every time. We should say Bill Saylor, who used to be Dave on the board for many years. Yes, and yes, you do need to come back. I was just thinking you should see if you can get somebody from Max to come in here. They surely know the ins and outs of, what would be the best way for people to recycle things. Crumple your aluminum cans so
I
they take
have
up less
a- I have
volume.
a-
We'll do a whole show.
Yeah.
We got it.
I have a
Yeah.
5-page sheet of the recycle prices at Max. So,
Enjoy.
thanks for listening.
Right here on WEFT
Get
Champagne,
out there and help.
90.1 FM.